She could not see the car that nearly killed her. She could not see the man who caught her a half-second before the bumper did. But she felt his hand close around her wrist, like a vice built from steel and patience, and she heard him lean down close to her ear and say one single word, low enough that only she could hear it. Mine. That was the first thing Damon Rocca ever said to Mia Bennett, a woman who had not seen a human face in 6 years, and it was the last thing either of them expected to change the rest of their lives. Hello, lovely listeners. If you're settling in for this one, do me a favor and tap that like button before we start. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need a little escape tonight. And if you're new here, hit subscribe, because we post a brand new forbidden romance every single week. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. I read every single one, and it makes my whole day. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Girl Who Sees Without Eyes. Mia Bennett had learned, over 6 long years, that the world did not stop simply because she could no longer see it. It kept moving, kept honking, kept shoving past her on crowded sidewalks, utterly indifferent to the cane, tapping out a rhythm against the concrete like a second heartbeat. She had learned the particular smell of the coffee cart on the corner of Ninth and Lang, the way the air changed temperature, the moment she stepped beneath the overhang of the old brick tenement she called home. The exact number of steps between her apartment door and the elevator that rattled like it was one bad day from collapsing entirely. She had not always lived like this. At 19, Mia had been an ordinary university student with plans to study art restoration. Of all the cruel ironies, when a drunk driver ran a red light on a rain-slicked evening and turned her entire future into darkness in the space of one collision. The doctors had used words like optic nerve damage and irreversible, words that landed in her chest like stones dropped into still water, rippling outward into every corner of her life. Her parents, decent people who loved her but did not know how to hold that kind of grief, had eventually drifted into their own routines, calling on Sundays, sending money when they remembered, unable to look too closely at the daughter who had once painted watercolors and now moved through her apartment by memory alone. So Mia built a life out of what remained. She tuned pianos for a living, an occupation she had stumbled into almost by accident, when a kind old instructor at a rehabilitation center noticed she had an ear sharp enough to detect a piano string a hair's breadth out of true. It turned out that losing her sight had sharpened everything else about her: her hearing, her memory for footsteps and voices, her sense of the spaces around her, the way a hallway breathed differently than a room. She built a small, careful business out of it, traveling by cab or by the kindness of a neighbor to apartments and concert halls across the city, running her fingers over keys and coaxing them back into harmony one note at a time. She lived alone in a modest walk-up above a laundromat, in a neighborhood that had once been rough and was now merely tired, caught in that uneasy middle ground of a city slowly changing around it. She liked her independence fiercely, defended it the way other people defended their pride, because independence was the one thing the accident had not managed to take from her, even if it had tried its hardest. What Mia did not know, on the particular gray Tuesday morning this story begins, was that the neighborhood she called home sat only 4 blocks from a nightclub called the Obsidian Room, and that the nightclub belonged, in every way that mattered, to a man named Damon Rocca. She did not know his name, she did not know his face. She had certainly never heard the whispers that followed him through the city like smoke, the kind of whispers people only allowed themselves once he was safely out of earshot. All she knew, that morning, was that she was running late for an appointment to tune a Steinway 3 blocks away, and that the crosswalk signal had just made its familiar chirping sound, telling her it was safe to step off the curb. It was not safe, not even close. Chapter 2: The Man in the Dark Car. The black sedan came around the corner faster than it should have, tires cutting through a puddle left behind by the morning's rain, and later, when Mia replayed the moment in her memory, she would swear she heard the engine before she heard anything else, a low, hungry growl that did not belong on a residential street. She had already stepped off the curb, her cane swept forward, found nothing but open air where the crosswalk should have been safe, and then everything happened at once. A car horn, a shout from somewhere on the sidewalk, and then a hand, impossibly strong, closing around her wrist and yanking her backward with such force that she stumbled directly into a wall of a man, solid and warm and smelling faintly of cedar and gun oil, though she would not place that second scent until much later. The sedan roared past close enough that she felt the wind of it against her skirt, and then it was gone, swallowed by the noise of the city as though it had never existed at all. For a moment, neither of them moved. Mia's heart hammered so hard she was certain the stranger, holding her upright, could feel it. Her cane had clattered to the pavement somewhere she could not immediately place, and she was abruptly, humiliatingly aware of how helpless she must look, gripped by a man whose face she would never see, saved from a death she had not even known was coming for her. "Are you hurt?" the man asked. His voice was low, controlled. The kind of voice that did not often ask questions because it did not often need to. There was the faintest accent buried beneath it, something she could not place, softened by years of living somewhere else. "I'm fine," Mia managed, though her voice shook more than she would have liked. "Thank you. I don't know what happened. I heard the signal. I thought it was clear. It wasn't clear." His grip on her wrist did not loosen right away. If anything, his thumb pressed once, briefly, against the inside of her wrist, as though he were checking her pulse the way a man might check that a possession was still intact. "You should be more careful." There was something in the way he said it, some undertone that made the words land less like a scolding and more like a vow. Mia tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when she was trying to read a person through sound alone, cataloging the timbre of his voice, the faint rasp of expensive wool against her sleeve where his coat brushed hers, the stillness of him, a stillness that felt less like calm and more like coiled restraint. "You caught me awfully fast," she said before she could stop herself. "Most people don't move like that." A pause. She felt his gaze on her, even though she could not see it, felt it the way you feel sunlight through closed eyelids, warm and undeniable. "I've had practice," he said simply. He released her wrist then, but not before pressing her cane back into her palm, and Mia realized with a small jolt that he must have retrieved it from the ground himself, must have knelt in the wet street to do it, all in the space of a few seconds. Before she could ask his name, before she could even properly thank him, she felt him lean down, closer than propriety strictly allowed, close enough that his breath stirred the hair near her ear. Mine murmured. Just that. One word, spoken so quietly she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. Then he was gone. She heard footsteps retreating, unhurried, a car door opening and closing with the particular heavy thunk of something built for more than comfort, an engine starting somewhere down the block. And Mia Bennett stood on the corner of a street she had walked 100 times, gripping her cane, utterly certain that something enormous had just happened to her, though she could not begin to say what. Chapter 3. Shadows that follow. In the days that followed, small things began to change, so subtly at first that Mia told herself she was imagining it. The cab that arrived to take her to her piano appointments seemed to come faster than usual, and when she asked the driver his name, he only said politely that the fare had already been covered. The corner store, where she bought her groceries twice a week, began setting aside the exact items on her usual list before she even asked, and the owner, a gruff man named Petrov, who had never once offered her more than a nod, started walking her personally to the door and waiting until he heard her apartment lock click 3 flights up. She told herself it was coincidence. She told herself the city was simply, finally being kind to her, the way it occasionally was, in fits and starts, as if to apologize for all the ways it usually was not. But then there was the night she heard footsteps outside her building that lingered too long. Footsteps that paced rather than passed. And when she opened her window to listen more carefully, she heard a low voice say something in a language she did not recognize, followed by the unmistakable click of a car door and the growl of an engine pulling away. She had not been afraid exactly. She had felt, instead, an odd and unfamiliar sensation of being watched over, guarded, the way a piece of glass might feel wrapped carefully in newspaper for shipping, protected precisely because someone considered it valuable. It was on the 7th day after the accident on the crosswalk that Mia finally learned his name, though not from him. She was tuning a piano in the lobby of a hotel downtown, her fingers moving across the keys with the practiced patience of someone who had done this 1,000 times, when she overheard 2 women speaking near the concierge desk. their voices pitched low but not quite low enough. "Did you hear?" one of them whispered. "Damon Raka was here last week. My cousin works at the Obsidian Room. She says nobody even looks at him directly, not even the men who work for him." "I heard he had someone tailed for weeks," the other replied, delighted and terrified in equal measure, the way people always are by rumors of danger that do not belong to them. "Some girl downtown. Nobody knows why. He doesn't usually bother with anyone who isn't already in his world." Mia's fingers stilled on the keys. Damon Raka. The name settled into her like a stone, dropped into a well. And though she had never heard it before, some instinct deep in her chest recognized it immediately, recognized the shape of the man who had pulled her back from a speeding car and pressed her cane into her hand and murmured a single word against her ear before vanishing. She finished the piano because she was a professional and because her hands, at least, did not shake even when her heart did. And then she went home and sat very still in her small kitchen for a long time, turning the name over and over like a coin she was trying to decide whether to spend. Chapter 4. The Debt. She did not have long to wonder what it all meant. 3 days later, a man came to her apartment building, and Mia knew from the moment she heard his footsteps on the stairwell that he did not belong there. His shoes were too polished, his stride too deliberate, and there was a coldness in the way he knocked, 3 sharp raps, that made the hair on the back of her neck rise before he had even spoken a word. "Mia Bennett," the voice on the other side of the door said, when she asked who it was. Not a question, a confirmation. She should not have opened the door. Every instinct told her not to. But there was something about the stillness of the hallway, the absence of the usual creak of Petrov's floor above, or the murmur of her elderly neighbor's television, that told her the building had emptied itself around this visit, as though the whole street had been holding its breath, waiting for it. "Who's asking?" she said instead, keeping the chain latched, her cane held loosely in one hand like a weapon she had never once needed to use before. "Your father owes a debt," the man said flatly. "To people who do not forget. We've been patient. That patience is ending." Mia's blood went cold. She had not spoken to her father in nearly 8 months, had no idea what business he had gotten himself tangled in, only that he had always had a weakness for cards and for men who smiled too easily and promised too much. She opened her mouth to explain that she had nothing to do with whatever he owed, that she had built a life entirely separate from his mistakes, brick by careful brick, but before she could speak, a second set of footsteps arrived on the landing, unhurried, heavy with authority, and the temperature of the hallway seemed to drop several degrees. "You have exactly one chance to walk away from this door," said a voice Mia recognized instantly, low and controlled and edged with something far more dangerous than anger. "Damon Raka." "This isn't your territory, Raka," the first man said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "She is," Damon said simply, and something about the way he said it, flat and absolute, sent a shudder through Mia that she could not entirely name. She heard scuffling, a muffled protest, the particular silence of a man realizing he had made a very serious mistake, and then footsteps retreating fast down the stairwell, taking the threat with them. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own breathing and, beyond the chained door, the low, even breathing of the man who had just chased away a threat she had not even fully understood. "You should let me in," Damon said finally. "Or you can keep talking to me through a door chain like I'm a door-to-door salesman. Your choice, but I promise you I'm considerably more patient than I look." Despite herself, despite the fear still hammering through her chest, Mia felt the corner of her mouth twitch. She unlatched the chain. Chapter 5. The truth in his voice. He did not sit until she offered him a seat, and even then he chose the chair nearest the door, the way, she would later learn, men like him always did, keeping the exits within reach out of habit, rather than fear. Mia made tea, more to give her hands something to do than out of any real hospitality, and set a cup in front of him with the careful precision of someone who had memorized her kitchen, inch by inch over years of necessity. "You've been having me followed," she said, once the silence had stretched long enough to become unbearable. "Watched, protected, whatever word you want to use for it." "Yes," Damon said. No excuse, no softening, just the truth laid out plainly. The way she was beginning to understand he laid most things out. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, and Mia found herself leaning toward the sound of his breathing. trying to read the answer in it before he gave it in words, the way she read everything now, through the spaces between sounds, rather than the sounds themselves. 6 years ago, he said finally, I had a sister, Elena. She was blind too, from birth, not an accident like yours, but blind all the same. She used to walk the same 3 blocks to her music lessons every single day. Rain or shine, refused anyone's help, said the city owed her nothing and she'd take nothing from it. He paused, and Mia heard something shift in his voice, something that had nothing to do with the cold, controlled man who had chased away threats on her doorstep only minutes before. A car hit her, on a crosswalk. Driver never stopped. Mia's chest tightened painfully. Damon, I'm so sorry. I wasn't there, he continued, as though she hadn't spoken, as though the words had been building inside him for 6 long years, and had simply been waiting for the right silence to fall into. I was 22, running my father's business already because he was too sick to do it himself, and I told her I'd walk with her that day, and something came up, and I sent someone else instead, and he was late, and she was gone before either of us reached her. The apartment fell silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic 3 floors below. Mia reached out, unerringly, the way she reached for everything now, and found his hand resting on the table between them. She did not grip it. She simply let her fingers rest against his knuckles, feeling the tension there, the way his whole body seemed strung as tight as piano wire. That's why you stopped for me, she said quietly. On the crosswalk. I saw you step off that curb, Damon said, his voice rough now, stripped of its earlier control, and for 1 second I was 22 years old again, and I would not let it happen twice. And the whispered word, Mia said, because she had to know, because it had haunted her for a week and a half like a melody she could not stop humming. Mine. What did you mean by that? Damon turned his hand beneath hers, slowly, until his fingers laced through hers instead. I meant, he said, that whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I am not letting you walk through this city unprotected ever again. Call it possessive, call it whatever you like. I don't particularly care what it's called. I only care that it's true. Mia should have been afraid of a man who spoke about ownership so casually, who had men following her without her knowledge, who had made 2 grown men flee down a stairwell with nothing but the sound of his voice. But sitting across from him in her small kitchen, his hand warm and steady in hers, she found she was not afraid at all. She was, instead, something far more dangerous. She was curious. And beneath the curiosity, quiet and unmistakable, was the first flicker of something that felt uncomfortably close to hope. Chapter 6. The Enemy Closes In. Over the following weeks, Damon Rocca became a fixture in Mia's life in ways she never could have predicted. He did not sweep her off her feet with grand romantic gestures, not at first. Instead, he showed up in small, deliberate ways, the way a man accustomed to strategy might lay siege to a fortress patiently rather than all at once. He learned, without ever being told, which stairs in her building creaked and adjusted his footsteps accordingly. He memorized her schedule of piano appointments and made certain, without ever admitting it outright, that a car was always nearby in case she needed it. He learned to describe things to her the way she preferred, textures and sounds and temperatures rather than colors and shapes. And Mia found herself, against every instinct of caution she had spent 6 years building, beginning to trust him completely. She learned things about him too. That his real name, buried beneath decades of inherited reputation, was simply Damon. No title, no legend, just a boy who had lost his father too young and his sister too soon, and had built a fortress of control around himself because the alternative, feeling everything at once, had once nearly destroyed him. She learned the particular cadence of his laugh, rare and low and startled out of him, as though he were constantly surprised to discover he was still capable of it. She learned that beneath the cold reputation the whole city seemed to whisper about, there was a man who brought her a specific brand of tea because he had noticed, without her ever saying so, that it was her favorite. But the world Damon Rocca lived in did not forgive softness easily, and it was only a matter of time before someone decided to use Mia against him. It happened on a Thursday evening, 3 months after the crosswalk, when Mia was walking home from a late piano appointment and felt, with the particular certainty of someone who had learned to trust her instincts above all else, that she was being followed. Not by Damon's men, whose footsteps she had come to recognize as easily as her own heartbeat, careful and respectful and always keeping a polite distance. These footsteps were different, closer, hungrier. She quickened her pace, cane sweeping the pavement in front of her, heart hammering, and then a hand closed around her arm, rough and unfamiliar, and a voice she had never heard before said, low and mocking, Raka's little blind girl. Let's see how much he really values you, she fought. She would tell Damon later, when it was all over, that she had not simply frozen the way she might have imagined she would, that some fierce and furious part of her had clawed and kicked and screamed until her throat was raw. But there were two of them and only one of her, and within moments a cloth soaked in something sickly sweet was pressed over her nose and mouth, and the world she had built so carefully out of sound and memory dissolved into an even deeper darkness than the one she already knew. Chapter 7. The Rescue and the Confession. When Mia woke, she was in an unfamiliar room, the air cold and damp and smelling faintly of motor oil, her wrists bound to the arms of a hard wooden chair. She could hear voices arguing somewhere beyond a thin wall, could hear the particular tension in them that told her, even without sight, that whatever plan these men had made had already begun to unravel. Rocca's going to burn this whole block down when he finds out, one voice hissed. He won't find out until it's too late, the other snapped back. We move her by midnight. We're gone before he even knows where to look. Mia forced herself to breathe evenly, to listen, to catalog every sound the way she had trained herself to do for 6 long years. Footsteps, 3 sets, maybe 4, a door that stuck slightly when it opened, scraping against a warped frame. The distant, rhythmic sound of water dripping somewhere to her left, which told her, with the precision only someone who had learned to navigate the world through sound alone could manage, that she was likely in a basement near a water line, probably beneath one of the old warehouses down by the docks that she had heard mentioned once or twice in passing. She did not know, could not know, that 4 blocks away Damon Rocca had received a single text message, a photograph of her piano tuning kit left conspicuously on a warehouse loading dock, and had gone very, very still in a way that terrified the men standing closest to him far more than any shout ever could have. She did not know that within 11 minutes, every resource his organization possessed had been mobilized, that he had personally torn through 3 separate locations before a terrified informant, more afraid of Damon than of whoever had taken her, finally gave up the address. What Mia did know was the sound of a door being kicked entirely off its hinges, splintering wood and shouting, and the particular chaos of violence unfolding in a confined space, followed by silence, and then footsteps, unmistakable, unhurried despite everything, crossing the room toward her. Mia. His voice broke on her name in a way she had never heard before. All of his careful control shattered into something raw and desperate. His hands found the ropes at her wrists, working them loose with fingers that trembled, actually trembled. This man who never once seemed to lose his composure. I'm okay, she whispered, though her voice shook. Damon, I'm okay. You are not okay, he said fiercely, pulling her against his chest the moment her hands were free, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart slamming against his ribs. You could have died, because of me. Because of who I am and what I've built and every enemy I've ever made. Then tell me the truth, Mia said, pulling back just enough to face the direction of his voice, her hands finding his face, mapping the sharp line of his jaw, the furrow between his brows that she could feel even without seeing it. Tell me if this is too dangerous. Tell me if I should walk away. There was a long silence, broken only by the distant sound of his men securing the building around them, and when Damon finally spoke, his voice had steadied into something quiet and certain. I have spent my entire adult life building walls, he said, around my business, around my family, around whatever was left of my heart after I lost Elena. I told myself I would never let anyone close enough to be used against me again. And then you stepped off a curb in front of my car, and every single wall I had built came down in the space of 1 second. He pressed his forehead against hers, and Mia felt the warmth of his breath against her lips. I could ask you to walk away. It would be the responsible thing to do. But I am too selfish a man to do that, Mia. I need you to know that. I want you to stay, not despite the danger, but because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure nothing, and no one ever gets close enough to hurt you again. That's a lot of promises, Mia said softly. though her voice trembled with something that was no longer fear. "I intend to keep every one of them," Damon said, and then he kissed her, gently at first, and then with a desperation that spoke of everything he had nearly lost that night. And Mia kissed him back with a certainty she had not expected to feel so completely. Not after everything. Not after 6 years of learning to need no one but herself. Chapter 8. Sight Beyond Sight. The men who had taken her were dealt with in ways Mia chose not to ask too many questions about. And within a week, the rival family responsible had sent, through careful and diplomatic channels, a formal apology and a promise that Mia Bennett would never again be considered a target, a promise Damon made certain was backed by consequences severe enough that no one in the city would ever consider testing it twice. Her father, it turned out, had gotten tangled up in a debt to a low-level associate of that same family, a debt Damon quietly settled without ever mentioning it to Mia directly, though she found out eventually, the way she found out most things about him, through the careful, patient accumulation of small kindnesses that added up to an entire portrait of a man who loved fiercely and quietly and without ever needing credit for it. 6 months after the crosswalk, Damon took Mia to a rooftop garden he had built above the obsidian room, a space few people even knew existed, filled with fragrant jasmine and rosemary, and a small fountain whose gentle trickle Mia had come to associate with peace itself. He described it to her the way he always did now, without thinking twice about it. Textures and temperatures and sounds, the particular quality of the evening air against her skin, and when she reached out to touch the delicate petals of a jasmine vine curling along a trellis, she felt him move to kneel in front of her. "I am not a poet," Damon said, and she could hear the faint, uncharacteristic nervousness in his voice, endearing precisely because it was so rare. "I don't know the right words for this. I only know that the day I nearly lost you, I understood with absolute clarity that I had spent my whole life protecting things that did not matter and neglecting the one thing that did. I love you, Mia Bennett, not despite everything you cannot see, but because of everything you have taught me to feel." He pressed something small and cool into her palm, and her fingers, sensitive to every detail the way years of necessity had made them, traced the shape of a ring, simple and elegant, a single stone set into a band she could feel had been chosen with extraordinary care. "Marry me," Damon said simply. "Let me spend the rest of my life being the one person in this city you never have to be afraid of." Mia felt tears gather, warm and unexpected, and she laughed softly even as they slipped free. "You already are," she whispered. "You have been since the day you pulled me back from that street and whispered one word I couldn't stop thinking about." "And what's your answer?" Damon asked. His voice rough with hope, he was clearly trying, and failing, to keep contained. "Yes," Mia said, and felt him rise and pull her into his arms, felt his laugh, rare and low and utterly unguarded, rumble through his chest as he lifted her off her feet entirely, spinning her once beneath the sky she could not see but had somehow, in every way that mattered, finally learned to trust. They married in the spring, in a small ceremony in that same rooftop garden, jasmine woven through Mia's hair instead of a traditional veil, because she had told him once that flowers meant more to her than lace ever could, and Damon, who forgot nothing that mattered to her, had remembered. Her father walked her down a short aisle of stone, sober and humbled, and grateful for a second chance he knew he did not entirely deserve. Petrov from the corner store came, gruff as ever, and cried anyway. And Damon Rocca, a man the whole city still whispered about in careful lower deces, stood at the end of that aisle with his hands trembling for the second time in his adult life, waiting for the woman who had taught him that some things were worth being afraid of losing. Years later, when people asked Mia how it had all begun, she would smile and tell them the truth, that she had never once seen the face of the man she loved, not with her eyes, but that she had learned it anyway, every plane and edge of it, through the sound of his voice and the warmth of his hands, and the particular way his heartbeat had steadied the moment he first held her against him on a rain-slicked street corner. She had learned to see him the only way that had ever truly mattered. And when Damon, holding their small daughter in the garden he had built just for her, would lean down and murmur that same single word against Mia's ear, the word that had started it all, she would smile every single time, because some promises, once made, only grew stronger with every year that followed. Mine. If this story pulled at your heart tonight, give it a like and subscribe for more forbidden romance stories just like this one. Drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you hardest. I read every single one, and I love hearing what stays with you after the story ends. New videos every week, so make sure that notification bell is on so you never miss the next one. Thank you so much for spending this time with me tonight. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next story.